Welcome to week 6, everybody. It's the last of the 3 lectures on politics. And our topic this week is Justice as More Than Kindness, the Case for Robust Civility. We're going to slide into this topic in a couple of minutes, but before we do that, I need to take you on a little jaunt through what is admittedly some speculative theology to address the lingering question haunting us the last 2 weeks. Why didn't Jesus establish a direct earthly kingdom 2,000 years ago to meet our many needs for us? And why doesn't he do so now? If you took my suggestion last week and read either Matthew chapter 4 or Luke chapter 4, you learned that the first person to raise this question was not me. Satan beat me to it during his temptation of Jesus. Satan found Jesus starving in the wilderness after fasting for 40 days. This was Satan's big chance. He could derail God's plans if he could get into Jesus' head with a few temptations. So Satan started by suggesting Jesus should turn some nearby stones into bread. Satan has 3 chances to subvert Jesus' mission, and he spends the first one of them trying to get him to make a sandwich. Maybe Satan is just trying to get Jesus to cross a line, to do for the first time something at Satan's suggestion. This might soften Jesus up for bigger temptations later, I suppose. Or maybe Satan hopes Jesus doesn't even notice it's a temptation, since it's just a suggestion to go ahead and have a meal, which Jesus was going to do anyway pretty soon. But I suspect Satan is making a much bigger play. Jesus can feed himself by converting stones to bread, so he could feed everybody. It has always been within God's power to do this since the very beginning. The earth could have been a giant Kaiser roll, an inexhaustible food supply. Hunger did not have to be a problem. So Satan is saying, why don't you finally fix hunger like you could have all this time? But Jesus refused. Maybe you aren't convinced that Satan would try to ruin Jesus' ministry by suggesting he eliminate hunger, because isn't Satan supposed to want us to suffer? Let's look at the other 2 temptations to see if they shed light on Satan's strategy. Satan takes Jesus to the top of the temple in Jerusalem. Jump off, he says, and God will send his agents to save you. You won't even get a scratch. Then everyone will know you are the Son of God, the promised Messiah. You can remove all doubt about who you are, and also about whether there is even a God. Jesus says, no, thank you. So Satan offers to make Jesus king of all the earth. Once again, as in all the other temptations, what Satan is offering is already in Jesus' power. Satan is not offering something Jesus couldn't do for himself. This temptation is about timing. That wonderful thing you could do, why not do it now? Think about this. How much spiritual misery has been caused by doubt about God? How many people have slipped into unbelief in a God who is never visible or tangible, like all the objects and people around us? Why does God leave us where belief can be so hard when it all could be resolved with periodic dramatic spectacles? And note who would benefit from Jesus taking power. All of humanity. The path to justice would be cleared of the corruption, entrenched power, and violence that stands in our way now. War would cease, as would slavery, and every other form of state-supported oppression. Everyone would benefit. Satan's big 3 temptations would have the effect of eliminating huge swaths of human misery and suffering. But Jesus says no to all 3 temptations. In fact, Jesus treats all 3 temptations as abhorrent evils. What's going on here? Isn't God loving? Didn't God specifically create each of us, specifically pouring our soul into a developing fetus, so each of us could get into this wonderful, amazing, miraculous universe and be? If God would go to all that trouble out of love for each of us, wouldn't God want, at a minimum, for each of us to have the means to meet our needs? So we could enjoy, learn from, and grow during our one chance at life? That actually could be a good definition of a bare minimum of justice, each of us having access to means to meet our needs. So why doesn't God provide that for us every day, like manna from heaven? God must have some other plan in mind, right? And what is that other plan? I don't know, but I have a theory. Let's think a little bit more carefully about what life would be like under Jesus' direct, tangible rule, where all our needs, physical, spiritual, political, are met by God's daily fiat. What kind of people would we become? Incompetent ones, for starters. We'd have very little incentive to learn to do things for ourselves. We'd have zero or nearly zero agency in our own lives. We'd be useless pleasure seekers, either infantilized or quickly and irremediably bored. Probably both. It wouldn't be slavery exactly. We'd get to run our own lives, but they would be pointless. Also, we would be unable to love. If your potential loved ones have all their needs met by God's fiat, what could you ever do for them that would mean anything? You could not sacrifice anything for someone else's sake. And if you could, it would be meaningless because they would not need whatever it was you gave them. We could maybe decorate each other's lives or derive pleasure from each other. We already are prone to tell people we love them when we really mean we want them to decorate our lives. But surely we recognize that wanting someone for our own pleasure is not loving them. When we are willing to give up something to decorate someone else's life, or even better, to meet their needs, then we are beginning to love them. If Jesus was king and provided for our needs by fiat, we would never need anyone, nor be needed by anyone. We would never love. And if God were as tangible to us as the computer or phone you are using to watch this video, we would never need faith. We would know God exists, like Satan knows it. Faith is acting as if something is true without knowing it's true. And if you could be absolutely sure, and it should be absolutely clear to you by now, that God is not interested in helping us find certainty about fundamental questions like God's own existence. The three great things we're supposed to have, according to 1 Corinthians 13, are faith, hope, and love. Certainty isn't even on the list. Why doesn't Jesus rule directly and in person? Maybe it would destroy our capacity to have agency in our life, to love, and to have faith. Satan is ready to infantilize us, give us certainty, and keep us under control. That's how Satan wins. But God takes a risk with us by giving us freedom to choose so we can become agents in our own lives and learn to love and have faith. But what about all that suffering? All those millions who have starved, died from painful diseases or natural disasters, or were slaughtered by their fellow humans. All those slaves whose gift of life was stolen from them by someone else. All those who fell into despair, addiction, homelessness, and hopeless unbelief. Are intangibles like our agency and our learning faith and love worth all this too tangible suffering? I don't know, but I think there is more to the story. Our loving God has not abandoned us to misery. God built into our world everything we need. This is God's providential love made concrete. The universe is stuffed with amazing resources, so we can use them to make things we need. We have soil and rain and sun, of course, but there's much more. We keep finding uses for things that we thought were useless, and we keep finding new uses for things we are already using. This process is speeding up, not slowing down. We are in a race to see if we can find the solutions to our problems before we destroy the world and each other. Even our diseases often come with their cures. The key ingredient for practically eliminating the scourge of polio from the face of the planet is the polio virus itself, made into vaccines. The physical resources strewn so lavishly across the universe are just part of God's providential love for us. We learn to recognize and use God's provided resources because God designed us to be amazing problem solvers. We are designed to be curious. We have excess cranial capacity, far more than we need. We use some of that extra capacity to ask questions and try to answer them, like, can you make a root beer float with vanilla Greek yogurt instead of ice cream? Yes, you can, it turns out. And it's great. And we are designed to disagree. You might not think it's so great. We procreate in such a way that each of us has unique genes. No one else has your genes unless you're an identical twin. And even if you are, the moment you are born, you start having your own unique experiences. This isn't an accident. It's by design. We are curious, and we are designed to see things differently from one another. This makes us a species incredibly good at solving problems because we have billions of points of view, billions of them. We like to share our points of view. We disagree a lot, all the time, with almost anyone we encounter. Buried in all those disagreements is a precious resource, the opportunity to learn, often for both sides in the disagreement. Our disagreements light the fire under human progress, including the discovery of new resources and new remedies for our problems. So human disagreement is a providential gift from God, critical to God for his plan for everyone to have means to meet their needs, i.e., critical to God's plan for justice. And as with all of God's gifts, our response should be stewardship, i.e., the careful management of the gift for the purpose it was given. Now we're coming back into the nice, friendly valley of politics and law, where your driver has some real credentials and you don't have to take things as provisionally. So let's see what we got here. When you manage someone else's resources, the law sees you as the agent and the person who owns the resources as the principal. Agents owe to principals a set of fiduciary duties: obedience, loyalty, diligence, information, and accounting. Essentially, these duties help to constrain the agent to act as closely as possible, just as the principal would act if the principal was there managing the resources for herself. If the principal has given instructions, the agent, sometimes called the steward, must obey those instructions. While the steward is doing his work, he needs to be as diligent as a reasonable person would be managing his own resources. The steward has to be loyal to the interests of the principal, as the principal defines them. He can't use the principal's resources for his own benefit, nor for anyone else's. And the steward has to be completely transparent with the principal about what he's doing and how he has spent the principal's assets. Does this apply to our stewardship of the disagreements we encounter among human beings? Remembering that those disagreements are crucial resources in God's plan for us to learn to meet each other's needs? We can answer this question by attending to three elements of disagreement: the relationship, the outcome, and the process. I'm taking these three dimensions from the work of Swedish peace scholar Johan Galtung and Quaker peacemakers John and Diana Lampin, who saw each of these dimensions as offering distinct approaches to resolving conflicts from the interpersonal level to the international. I'll be referring in my rest of my comments mostly to interpersonal conflicts, but my observations also apply to the other levels. The first of the dimensions, stewardship of the relationship. We can call this personal civility. A disagreement requires at least two people. Our job as God's steward is clear. We are to love the one bringing the disagreement to us. If the relationship predates the disagreement, we are still stewards, because valuable disagreements can arise with anyone, a mere acquaintance or a lifelong spouse. We are God's agents, tasked to show them God's love. Good stewards spend time and energy loving people for God, even while we're not disagreeing with them, but also while we are. We can call this personal civility because stewardship of the relationship is summed up in what people usually mean by when they urge us to be civil. That is, to be kind and respectful, try to be helpful, try not to unnecessarily offend. When we are at our best as steward of our relationships, we will find ourselves going beyond that normal meaning of civility. We will really see each other as fellow children of God, noticing their humanity, their qualities and quirks, and beginning to connect to what they are experiencing. They won't be just walking, talking objects in our lives. The second commandment says, love your neighbor as yourself. We are God's agents to everyone we encounter, called to love them all the same way that God loves them. Good stewardship of our relationships will make the next dimension easier. Number two, stewardship of the disagreement, which I want to call creative civility. How can we be good stewards of disagreement? We can embrace it gracefully and gratefully. Remember, humanity's penchant for disagreement is not a flaw. It's a precious resource given us by a loving God who wants the very best for us. This does not mean being disagreeable is a spiritual gift. So much depends on how we handle the disagreement. Disagreements are risky. If handled poorly, they can destroy, but so can fire. And yet we recognize that combustible resources are still resources. We just have to handle them right. Our nation was born of disagreements. The Bill of Rights, all of them together and each one separately, were honed and refined by strong disagreements. A bunch of people disagreeing has been necessary in every nation's decision to ban slavery, although a war was only required in America. Did one of your parents break up with someone else before getting together with the other of your parents? That breakup was a disagreement, without which you wouldn't be here. If we treat disagreement as a gift, we are seeing it as a chance to learn, to make better decisions, to enhance justice, and even to heal relationships. I have seen all these things happen and over in mediations and in other settings too. Seeing disagreement as a precious gift is a way to approach the disagreement more creatively and constructively, which is a big help in finding the way through God has in mind and all the benefits that flow from that kind of resolution. A creative civility approach to disagreement will feature a lot of excellent curiosity-driven listening. Listen past your assumptions and preconceptions until you can state the other side's point of view to their satisfaction. Look for perspectives you hadn't considered. Listen until you can identify the ways you and your dissenter agree and the ways you disagree. Use areas of agreement as common ground on which you and your dissenter can stand and see if that common ground can grow. Be open to new ideas and help your dissenter feel safe in being open too. Listen until you and your dissenter can find a place of human connection where you each can recognize how it feels to be the other. In a mediation I observed between a landlord and his tenant, the human connection came when the tenant described how unsafe she felt her children were in the neighborhood. The landlord recognized how different his own experience had been growing up in that same house. He expressed how much he wanted his tenant's children to have the same feeling of safety he had enjoyed. Listen until you and your dissenter can get on the same side of the table, becoming co-laborers in looking for solutions. Throughout the conduct of the disagreement and beyond, show gratitude for your dissenters. Do what you can to keep them in the game, even if they seem to be ready to give up. Their interests are important to you if you love them the way God does, and you never want to lose their contribution. The third dimension is stewardship of political culture, civility as bridge building. Always think beyond the immediate situation. In any ongoing relationship, winning on one issue will not be worth much if in the process you destroy the possibility of working together on other issues. So always act to strengthen and protect the political culture. Every group has a culture. It's part of what marks it as a group. The group's culture includes all the roles, values, norms, practices, structures, artifacts you remember from your sociology class. Polities, those decision-making groups we've been talking about, have cultures too. The aspect of their culture that relates to decision-making is the group's political culture. Not all political cultures are equal, nor are any of them static. Those that most closely approach stasis are probably not the healthiest. In America, for the last 25 to 50 years, depending on whom you ask, our national political culture has become more polarized, featuring fewer episodes of bipartisan cooperation and rising levels of mistrust and alienation. People are sorting themselves geographically these days by partisan opinion, moving to places where people agree with them, more than they have in the past. A process that seems to be accelerating recently, both on the national level and within states. 70 years ago, political scientists might have hailed this polarization as a good thing for democracy. In 1950, most political scientists believed the major American political parties were too much alike, making it hard for voters to know whom to hold responsible for successes or failures. But most political scientists now sing a different tune, troubled by our political system's inability to craft creative solutions, even when there is broad cross-partisan agreement that something needs to be done, for example, about immigration. There is more talk now about states seceding from the Union or counties seceding from their states than there has been in my lifetime, and possibly since the Civil War. There is also more talk now of distrust of ballot counters and the courts and the political institutions in general that there has been in many decades. All things considered, these are not healthy signs for a connected, rational, public-spirited, and effective government. They not only undermine the practical operations of the government, They erode the entire system's ability to create laws that serve as effective moral guides. And governments with corroded political cultures lose legitimacy in the eyes of the people, compounding all these problems. Civility as stewardship of the political culture does not ask us to stifle our disagreements, but it does ask us to treat them as gifts rather than attacks. Do you find yourself inhabiting a political monoculture where everyone pretty much agrees? You can strengthen the political culture by building relationships with people who disagree with you. Those relationships do not have to be about politics. They could be about hobbies, sports fantasy leagues, church activities, organic gardening, vanilla yogurt, root beer floats, anything. Debubble yourself. Build bridges. Tend the soil of the political culture. Do you find yourself or those around you actively despoiling the political culture by demonizing those on the other side, attributing vile motives based on their suspicions, or spreading distorted information? Try to humanize your opponents. Get better information. Encourage empathy. A disparaging joke about people on the left or the right should be just as unacceptable to you as a similar joke about people of a different race or religion. Cut back on the political hit job websites and newsletters. They are making money off your anger and fear, and they know it, which is why they work so hard to make you angry or afraid. They might as well be drug dealers. Refuse to be their victims. Hone your skills for cooperative problem solving. Take a community mediation training. The skills you learned there will be tremendously valuable, even if you never serve as an official mediator. Do joint projects with a cross-partisan group, maybe about something apolitical, like sprucing up a playground or coaching a youth sports team. Build trust by giving and asking for trust loans, taking a manageable risk that someone of a different view will show up on time and keep a commitment. Be trustworthy yourself. In conclusion, why doesn't Jesus take over the world government? Well, depending on your interpretation of the various biblical passages, that might yet still happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So it's fair to assume there are strong reasons, very strong reasons, given the chronic human suffering that is still with us, for leaving to us the job of getting justice done. I suspect those reasons have to do with leaving room for humans to be agents in their own lives and cultures, and for the development of key elements of spiritual and moral character, especially love for our neighbors and our enemies, and the capacity to live by faith. Thank you for listening to this lecture and the previous two that I've given you, and I hope you found them worthwhile. See you again soon.